Ewi de wongile. Omaha ijaje wiwitate shonge chube wa'u. Wache ijaje wiwitate Rene Sansusi. Omaha wa'ubli. So what I said was, all my relations, my Omaha name is Sacred Horsewoman. My English name is Rene Sansusi. I'm an Omaha woman. And I began that way, in the way that my mother had taught me. This is a very proper way. It's a short and sweet way as well, because that introduction can go much further and be much longer, but I don't want to go into all my ancestry right now. So I greeted you this way, in a formal way, as the Omaha people do. This lets you know exactly who I am and what tribe I'm from. And if you know anything about the Omaha tribe, then you know we're from here. So I wanted to explain something before, continuing forth. One thing is that in our languages, not just the Omaha language, you have the Ponca language, the Ho-Chunk language, and the Dakota Isanti language, the Lakota languages, the Pawnee language, the Cheyenne language, all the people that have been residents here in Nebraska, indigenous to this land, but also formerly, that had lived here. We also have the Oto, and we're in the land of the Oto, as if you're aware of that. And currently they are near the southeastern border and in Kansas. So I wanted to say our languages are always strongly connected to the land. So the land base that we live on, our languages are connected here. So I want to ask you a question, and anybody can answer. Right now there's no right or wrong answers. I'm going to let you know that. And each one of you as educators and so forth, I'm sure that you're familiar with native language to a certain degree. How many of you can say you know native words? And I will say this, all of you know at least one native word, and that is the word Nebraska itself. So Nebraska is also an Oto word, and in Oto it means the same thing as it means in the Omaha language. The Omaha Ponca, we say ni blaska. Ni is water, blaska is flat, like this surface here. That's our name for the Platte River. And this conference, of course, is all about water. So I'm discussing, the connections to water, but also to everything that is, who I am. And when I say I am, I'm talking about not only myself, but my ancestors. So you know at least one word. You know another word too, and that's Omaha itself, the city. But we say Omaha. Omaha means against the current. That was a name that, we then described ourselves when we came up the river against the current to move in this area. And then, like I said, there's a lot of words that you are unaware of that are native. And I would say just about all over this country, which we call Turtle Island. We don't say the United States or Canada or Mexico. We say Turtle Island. That encompasses everything. So everywhere you go, does not matter what state, what territory, what region, etc., you're going to be immersed in native words. These are the locations that you are at. And as such, Niblaska. So I titled my presentation, Ni Niashinga Aka. Ni Niashinga Aka means people of the water. So in Omaha, we always refer to ourselves as Niashinga. Omaha Niashinga. And when you listen to the language, there's always a connection to water all the time. So Ni Niashinga means Ni, water, Niashinga, people. So again, even in that word for people or human beings is the word of water. Because of course, what are we made out of? Mostly water. I wanted you to think that way as I'm going through my presentation. So this first one, and what I said on here, Omaha Nyashinga, people of the water. So Pahongadi, long time ago in the time of the ancestors. So in other words, this is like, an introduction to like Star Wars, right? Like George Lucas, he took these concepts from Native people and Indigenous people from all over the world that he then put into his movie. And in fact, he also consulted with an Omaha tribal member and gained a lot of insight as to how he was going to utilize these teachings of course, in his movies. Unfortunately, none of us had ever seen, any of those kinds of royalties or anything for our consultation, right? So Pohongadi, long time ago, in the Omaha sacred legend, it is said that in the beginning, the people were in the water. When they opened their eyes, they could see nothing. As they arose from the water, they beheld the day for the first time and began life as human beings. So in our sacred legend, it says that we came from the water, we arose out of the water, and as we done so, we were wiping our eyes like this, rubbing our eyes, trying to clear the water out of our eyes so we could see. We became land dwellers at that point. We had to learn everything. How to cover ourselves, to protect our bodies, how to gather our foods and our medicines, how to prepare our food, with fire. And in our sacred legend, fire was also a gift, but it came as a gift from the thunder beings, what we say. So the thunders gave us that gift of life so that we can warm ourselves and prepare our foods, on and on. In our sacred legend, it talks about where we came from. And I don't have time to go further into that. I'm just focused on water. I do know that as these stories were told in our languages, that they were often told at night and during the wintertime. Oftentimes, we were told that, we had to wait until the first snow, had fallen. Then began a lot of these stories, like our creation stories, and like I said, our sacred legend. This was a way of not only preserving our history, but also bringing about an understanding to our people, to our children especially. And it was always about the responsibility that we carried that was passed down from our ancestors. The responsibility for not only our people, not only our languages or our spirituality, but our connection to land and water. There are many words in the Omaha language that are connected to water, and I'll name just a few of them. If you can imagine, as they always talk about, all the words connected with snow in some of the Athabascan or the Tlingit languages, then you can imagine how we connect to water. Ni, water. Ni abiche, boiling water. Ni amuchto, to irrigate or irrigation. Ni anose, to dam or dike, to close the water off. And then niashinga, the human or human beings. Ni skide, which is sweet water, juice, or salt. And a quick note about that. Our name for Lincoln in Omaha is Niskide Toa. That means salt town. Because this region here where we're at, this is where not only the Omaha people, but all the tribes that were in this area, we came to harvest salt. So Lincoln is known as Salt Town. Niskide Toa. And we say that, when we're talking about Lincoln. Ni gabahu. This is a wave of water, a current of water. Ni gaha. This is a branch of water. Ni goha. This is a riverbank. Niha. It's a snail or seashell. Nihonga. This is the spring of water. And again, I grew up again with a lot of, hearing our stories and so forth. And a lot was mentioned of the Nihonga. So to me, I had a very strong reverence for the Nihonga, the springs. This is where our natural water comes from, out of the earth. Ni ibise, thirsty. Ni kagahi. This is a chief of a tribe or of a band or a clan and so forth. So again, a person that carries such a title, again, is referenced through water. Ni Blaska, the Platte River, or the name of our state. Ni Shude Aka. Now this is the name of the Missouri River. This is what we call the Missouri. So to us, to the Omaha, the Missouri is ours. We had claims over it for generations, and we were the ones that safeguarded that river. You could not come through that river without our permission. Ni Ubrava. This is our name for the Niobrara River. So I'm sure it would be Niobrara or something like that in the Oto language, but we say Ni Ubrava. Ni, water again. Ubrava means it's everywhere. It's spread out, like here and there. So that's how if you see the Niobrara, then you know how it looks, and it is spread all over the place. And then this last word I'll share is Nita. Nita means alive or life, again connected to water. I wanted to share these words because I want to give you an idea of how water is so closely interwoven into our belief system and into how we interact with everyone and all beings and to the land. So this part I called Inoha Mojon Ie. And it's a literal translation, meaning language of Mother Earth. There are other ways to say that in the Omaha language, but this was simple and straightforward because sometimes when we're getting into the language, our translations will be much longer. So for brevity, I just kept it as this. Inoha Mojon Ie. This is how someone like me thinks. So I'm giving you something, I guess, simple, but I can kind of give you a filler. So, Da Vision Bedombe means the 7 directions. Usni Ati, Ata Vishon. That is north. And Ue Thomba Vatishon. That is east. Moshte Ata Vishon. That is south. And Ite Don Vatishon. That's west. So for the directions, those are the four. And then in our tribal circle, our Huduga, we say, we have two moieties that are represented. And these are the sky people and the earth people. So the sky people are the Ishta Sunda people. And the earth people are the Hongashenu. But for this description, I use these words, Mohe Ata Vishon, for the direction of the sky. So it's up, right? Going, Mohe is the sky. And Ata Vishon is the direction. And then, Donde Ata Vishon. So that's the earth, pointing to the earth. And for the center is Idombe Ati. This is where I'm standing. I'm standing at the center, Idombe Ati. Or Udison Ati. And as simple as that looks, the teachings that go into that are very complex. So this is only, symbolic of all the teachings that are embedded within our philosophy and belief. Within this circle also, oftentimes, if you go to our reservation, which is about 100 miles north of here, you'll see this symbol, but you'll see the clans that are listed on there. The sky clans and the earth clans. There's 5 in each moiety. And this symbol, again, isn't just 2-dimensional. It's 3-dimensional. It's spherical. So the way I describe it, when I work with kids, this is what I'm teaching about. And I do activities with them, movements and so forth, and to demonstrate how this works. Because it's also very scientific. Because it has to do with magnetism, right? So you know how the magnets have north and south and so forth. So I often demonstrate how our tribal circle works with magnets. We can't have one without the other. It's a balance. So sometimes and oftentimes, the sky people are represented or associated with the northern part of a magnet. And the earth people are often connected with the southern part of a magnet. So what do we say? Like especially for the earth, these are hemispheres, right? You can't have one without the other. Because then there would be no what? We wouldn't have gravity, so on, everything. Everything you could think of would not exist without that magnetism. And it's all about spinning too, right? So I utilize these kinds of teachings and I will share, to the kids. And I'm not talking just about Native kids, I'm talking about all children. I just share some phrases, why, how this came about, but also teaching them about, the scientific process of electromagnetism. Now, we get into this kind of thinking, and for me, it's like, this is something I'm always thinking about, day in and day out. It's just how I walk. That center line that you see up in that middle, that represents our path of life. We call it the path of the sun. So that center line represents how we're supposed to walk in life, in balance between these two energies. Some people say positive and negative. I always think of it, it is a balance. We can't be too much or too, of one or the other. Too much of either one, because then we're out of balance, of course. That's a philosophy, as you know. The center, idobe ati. What that means is like, this is where I'm standing. And what's around me, the four directions, what's above me, what's below me. And when I'm aware of that, then I'm never lost. This is what I teach kids, and I let them know that. How can you ever be lost if you understand that in your mind, your concept, your body? So it helps them, when I do these kinds of activities, and I would love to do that if we had the space and time, but of course we don't, so I'm just describing what I do when I teach. So in the second illustration here, the Pahe Duba Nita. Pahe is hills. Duba means four. Nita, again, means life. So these are the four hills of life. So in our philosophy, we have the Shinga Pahe. The first hill, Shinga has to do with children. That's the beginning. It's the eastern doorway, as we describe it. Where the sun rises. It's the beginning of life. And also, it's a time of spring. That second hill, going to the south, Shinga Adi, Pahe Weinomba. So that's the second hill, Pahe Weinomba. But Shinga has to do with being a young person, youth. So that represents, these are like time periods in a human being's life. That third hill says no, Pahe Weilavli. That's the third hill. That has to do with when you're an adult. And the last hill is Wano, Pahe Weiduba. Fourth hill. Fourth hill is when you're entering into that elder stage. And you look like an elder, or at least act like an elder. Yeah. Everybody has a different definition of what an elder is. All tribes do. All people do. So it's when your hair is turning white, and when you have achieved something, in life, your responsibilities, understanding, and so forth. And now you are able to help people and guide them along their path, their journey through life, or the path of the sun. So I'm describing this way, and I call it language of Mother Earth, because it helps to give a context to people to understand what's happening with them on this journey. And in these milestones, these four hills of life, then they have a reference again. Because, in our language and in our way of life, we're very clear about what we do. Our philosophy is very clear. We don't have any kind of, I guess, philosophical language like in Western philosophy. And believe me, I have studied Western philosophy. And it didn't appeal to me. Not in the way when I came back to my own. Then I could say, okay, I get it. Now, I gave you that description. I'm going into this section. I called it the water protectors. Because our way, again, we have a balance. That was the reason why I gave you the previous discussion on, on the language of Mother Earth. The balance between these two energies, right? And one energy represents a feminine energy. The other energy represents a masculine energy. So for the women, for myself, Our responsibility is to take care of the water and to take care of the earth. For the men, their responsibility is to take care of fire. They're the fire keepers. And they're also connected to air. And this photo that I'm sharing was taken in December when I was invited to a water ceremony up in northern Minnesota, Palisade, Minnesota, at the camp of Winona LaDuke. And if you're aware of her work, she's fighting the pipeline, Line 3, currently. So some of us are standing there along the Mississippi, which is right behind us. So women are known as the water protectors. In this time that we're in currently, many of us have stepped forward and said, okay, we're going to take on this work to advocate for the protection of water, not just for ourselves again, but for all human beings and all beings, for everything here on earth. And that has to do, again, with that balance that we're living in. The water ceremonies are something that have been revived within the last 40 years or so. Before that, I would say they were underground, because if you're familiar with what's happened to Native people here, we had so many federal Indian policies, and one was that our spiritual practices were outlawed. They were outlawed until 1978. With the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, we could then practice our spiritual beliefs without imprisonment. So consider that, this land that is considered land of the free, so forth. And, people that came here put that into their constitution about freedom of religion. Only the indigenous people were denied that freedom until recently. So, with these spiritual practices, our water ceremonies were revived. This is what I'm a practitioner of at this time. Again, going by what my tribe has always said too, previously, before colonization, that we were responsible for the water. So the calls to action, if you are familiar with, such as Standing Rock or No DAPL. And Standing Rock occurred in 2016. Many of us answered that call to action and went there. And if you're familiar with what happened there, it didn't go well. It was a battle, only one-sided actually. The Native people and allies did not have any weapons and stood against, great militarization. The other issue that we are more familiar with here in Nebraska is the No KXL. And as you know, that now has become something of, irrelevant now. And the last one, as I stated, was Stop Line 3. These are only 3 examples. There's plenty of other resistance going on here in this country, in Canada, and throughout the world. Protecting the water, meaning we're protecting the future. We want safe drinking water for everyone. And as such, we're looked upon as, I guess, eco-terrorists or some such thing. I don't regard myself that way. I don't carry any weapons. I'm not here to cause any kind of harm or destruction. But I am here to educate. So I'm talking about the rights of nature and what this means. Is anyone familiar with the rights of nature movement? So I will say that I'll read some things here. This is something that began, it's been around for quite a while, I would say. But recently it has become more of a stronger issue, especially in regards to rivers. There have been rivers in the world that have been recognized as having rights of a person. This is the rights of nature. To protect that river from fracking, and all the things that are being used, that water, earth, and so forth, that are being utilized in that way that is more destructive and dangerous to not only people, to animals, to the entire environment. So one of the first examples I can share is from New Zealand, the Wanganui River. So, and I'll read something here. The Te Awa Tapua Wanganui River Claim Settlement Act of 2017 recognizes the river and all its tributaries as a single entity called Te Awa Tapua, which has rights and interests and is the owner of its own riverbed. It also acknowledges the river as a living whole that stretches from the mountains to the sea, including both its physical and metaphysical elements. So, rights to ownership of the riverbed are vested in the river itself, which can sue and be sued as necessary. Te Awa Tapua is represented by a guardian, Te Pu Tupua, who must act and speak for the benefit of the river's health and well-being. This guardian consists of two people, one from the Crown and one from the Wanganui people. They serve as legal custodians in the same way that legal guardians represent children today in local parentis. The hybrid system draws on deeply divergent forms of order, Western legal and ancient Maori cultural, in an attempt to weave together a single solution. I always, when I think about that, and I had a chance to meet someone from New Zealand who spoke about this when I attended Pioneers in 2017. And this was my first introduction to rights of nature. So the New Zealand example also involved a lot of different people having to agree contentious issues touching on cultural oppression and use of resources. This took a long time, but it was worth it. A uniquely advanced collaborative governance approach emerged that could be used as a shortcut for rapid transition in other places. I think, when we reflect on such, precedents, it's something to consider here in Nebraska. So the next one is the Yurok tribe, the Klamath River. And if you remember anything about the Klamath River, our own billionaire, local billionaire here, what's his name again? The one in Omaha? Yes, Warren Buffett, right? So he had a lot to do with the Klamath River, way over on the West Coast. So I always thought, what was he doing up there? So the Yurok tribe at one point here, and this was several years back, I think almost 20 years ago, maybe 15, maybe. I'm trying to remember the year now. But the Klamath tribe did come here to Omaha in order to petition Buffett about what he was doing to their river. So they did reach some kind of agreement, and now the Yurok tribe is currently working on that. If they have passed something to recognize the Klamath River as having rights of a person. See, each tribe as a sovereign nation, can do this. So this is what the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma had done. Rights of nature, tribal law. They put that into their tribal law. And the treaties that the United States government had with all the sovereign nations here on Turtle Island are supposed to be the supreme law of the land, right? But yet, we continually have to battle that out in court. That's always our, our war zone. Since we can't actually go and fight anymore, but we're always, fighting legally. So we're, creating more attorneys to do that, help us. Our new warriors. Now, the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, they have what's called rights of Monoman. So again, Monoman is the wild rice. And if you ever seen a wild rice bed, or have you ever eaten wild rice? And I'm talking about the wild rice that is harvested by, these tribes that maintain them. Tastes very different than what we always say, the store-bought or processed rice. So whenever I get a chance, I'm always getting that wild rice from the tribes. But they also, in court, in their tribal resolutions, recognize the rights of Monoman, the rights of wild rice. So the considerations, and these are real simple kinds of questions, but I want you to consider it from my point of view, from an Indigenous lens, as they say, an Omaha worldview. What are we doing to protect our water here in Nebraska? And I heard that gentleman speak earlier about the contaminants and so forth. On our reservation, we're talking about environmental justice, right? So on our reservation, we have a lot of problems with runoff. And this contaminates our drinking water. We do have high rates of cancer in addition to all these other diseases. But it does impact us. My mother died from breast cancer. The drinking water on our reservation, I would say probably 3/4 of the time is undrinkable. Sometimes, that was what would happen. The water would be shut off. It's not safe to drink right now. So there we were, drinking cases and cases of water. That's just an example, but that happens to many reservations throughout this country or on Turtle Island. And I think it's worse up in Canada. A lot of the water that is contaminated up in Canada is from the tar sands. What sustainability practices are being utilized? Well, again, I want you to consider that from an Indigenous lens, as I said, an Indigenous worldview. What would it take to adopt a rights of nature approach here in Nebraska toward our water? So, I wanted to give you these, I guess my presentation was all about how I see the world, and I'm using myself as an example because, of course, I'm standing here in front of you. But to give you this Indigenous lens to consider, not only the water, but the land or Mother Earth, how you interact with water. Myself, I have water here with me in my copper cup. Water is the best conductor, right? One of the best. But in our belief system, water is also a conductor of our thoughts, our prayers, our beliefs. Whatever goes into water will stay there. So I want to say Nishude Aka. That's our name for the Missouri River. This was taken, from where I often go to make my offerings to the Nishude Aka. Offerings of tobacco and food and prayer. that this, beautiful being will continue to be there into the future. So with that, before I end, my mother had a story. Every year she'd say there was June rise. June rise when the flooding would occur. The natural flooding that, from the headwaters. And have you been to the headwaters of the Missouri in Montana? And you've walked into it? I've had that chance to put my feet in there and walk in there and feel that connection. So I know where the river, where the water comes from that comes through here and what happens to it along the way. All the tribes that live along the Missouri, we consider ourselves connected through that river. Ni shude aka. Ni is water. Shude means smoky or muddy. Aka means alive. It's a living being. So in the June rise and the flooding, that water would spread everywhere. Every year, my mom said she grew up seeing that. It was a natural occurrence. One where they would go after the waters would recede and get fish. Because, of course, we were fishing people, right? So to her, that was a good time. And that was before it was dammed up and diked and, everything that happened, from the Army Corps of Engineers. So again, it all depends on how you see it. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Who is looking at this issue? From what lens? So I guess my approach and my encouragement is that you take many lenses to this work that you're doing with water. Always, always consider Indigenous perspectives. Because we were here, First Peoples. But we're always the last to be consulted. So again, in my language I say, Wiblaha. Wiblaha means I thank you. Thank you kindly for listening to me today. I appreciate your kind attention and for the invitation to come and speak, present to you. And I wanted to share, this is my contact information. And this is only one issue that I speak about, but it's an issue I believe in strongly. Spiritually, it's a commitment. Also, before we go, I wanted to share, this is a skirt, a water protector skirt. It was designed and created by this woman named Agnes Woodward of Recreations. She also designed and created the skirt that Deb Haaland wore in her inauguration as Secretary of the Interior. First Native woman to serve in that position, ever. So that way I wanted to pay homage to my friend that made this skirt for me, just for this occasion. But now I will utilize it in all my work with water as well. So again, I say thank you, Wiblaha, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here throughout the day.